While the new Labor leadership attempts to focus on the future and party unity, Kevin Rudd's campaign advisor is telling all about the 2013 campaign.
Bruce Hawker has published his own campaign diaries in a new book, The Rudd Rebellion, and he joins us now in the studio. Bruce Hawker, good morning.
Morning, Virginia.
Why write this?
Good question. Look, it seemed like a good idea at the time, I guess, is what you could say. But
Does it now?
Yeah, I think so, because really what this was intended to do is to give people who don't see the inside of a campaign, insights into how tough it is and the challenges that come on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis. And I think readers will find that interesting.
The first question I had reading it, having experienced various campaigns as a reporter, how did you find the time to do this?
Yeah,
because you're working 14, 15, 16-hour days.
That took a bit of discipline. I had to do it at the end of the night. And I would take maybe 30, 45 minutes at the end of the night, which meant usually around about midnight, to just to jot it down. And I found that if I didn't write things down, it moved at such a pace you'd forget what had happened even 24 hours before. The recall would go.
Now, a couple of housekeeping questions before we get down to the nitty-gritty. Did Kevin Rudd approve you writing this book?
No, I didn't ask his approval for it.
Did he read the manuscript before it went to print?
No, he didn't, and he told me quite clearly that he wasn't going to. So that was good. I wouldn't have wanted him to be in there saying, "Oh, why didn't you write this, write that?"
Okay.
And I suspect that any politician would struggle not to do that.
Reading the book, you clearly lay a lot of the blame for the missteps on Labor Party's campaign headquarters. Are you denying any blame?
No. And I don't...
That's the impression you get reading the book.
Yeah,
that it's 80% mistakes were campaign headquarters. You guys in the plane, travelling this frenetic pace, made very, very few mistakes.
Well,
a lot of people would see it differently.
I didn't try to quantify it, and I certainly don't think that that's fair. I mean, certainly there were mistakes made all around. The main point that I make in the book, I think, is that there was a very short time between when he actually assumed the leadership and when the election was held. It was 74 days. So we had to move at a cracking pace from the beginning, and campaign headquarters had to turn everything around because they'd built a campaign around Julia Gillard, not around Kevin Rudd. So the diaries actually are an attempt to reveal on a day-by-day basis how those sort of processes were unfolding. And, you might be critical one day, but they're sorted out the next. And that was quite often the story.
Well, day-by-day basis is exactly the sort of criticism that emanated from party headquarters in the wake of the campaign loss, that there were decisions being made on the fly, that you and Kevin Rudd had gone off the reservation. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, well, I think that would be an exaggeration by any stretch of the imagination. I think there was one incident where, and it's the infamous or famous North Australia tax policy, where clearly there was a departure from what had been thought to be the policy. But that was a very popular policy in the Northern Territory, I've got to say. But I do think that was blown
Well,
out.
let's drill into that. I mean, this is a campaign diary. So how did that happen? Did Kevin Rudd really just have a thought bubble on the day? Did you have advice for him about that?
Well, one of the problems we had, of course, was that we didn't have a screed of policies going into the election campaign. We didn't have a team of people working for 2 years to build policies. So one of the issues I think that he had with the North Australian policy was that it really lacked grunt, without saying, look, this would involve a tax concession to operators in the Northern Territory. He didn't actually say by how much, because that was never agreed to by the leadership. But he did feel that it was important to say that's what would happen.
Without consulting senior colleagues, you had the likes of Penny Wong bemused within 24 hours when she was asked about details of this plan.
Yeah, I think that's all a little bit murky, who was told what and who discussed what at what time. But
well, you were on the plane. Who was told?
Well, I wasn't privy to all those discussions. But certainly there is a leadership group, and that leadership group was meeting on a regular basis. In fact, they had phone hookups on twice a day. So that would happen that happened on that one incident, I think it's fair to say. But it was seized on by opponents, and some were actually within the campaign, I've got to say, oh, look, this is chaotic and so forth. When, in fact, when you look at what he did, particularly in the first few weeks after he was elected, it's remarkable. Reformed the party, came up with the Papua New Guinean solution, got rid of the carbon tax and replaced it with an emissions trading scheme. A heck of a lot of things done in a very short period of time.
I just want to pick you up on something you said a moment ago, which is, you didn't have all those years of planning for policies, for this campaign. But isn't it true that Chris Bowen and indeed others were working on policies for Kevin Rudd, for a reinstalled Kevin Rudd prime ministership for some time? As Graham Richardson said on the night of the election itself, said that he'd been working on those policies. So it's not quite true, isn't it? There'd been backroom planning.
I think there'd been some work done, but but not in the detail that you require. One of the other problems we had, by the way, was that, as you recall, they had to issue a mini budget. They had to put out a mini budget, which meant billions of dollars being stripped out of the budget, and that reduced the amount of or the number of opportunities we had to develop more big picture policies. It was challenging in that regard.
Speaking of challenging, you are quite candid at various parts in the diary about the challenges in working with Kevin Rudd. You talked about numerous occasions asking him to slow down, get more sleep, take morning walks. You said he was ill-disciplined in some aspects of his presentation. How hard was he as a campaign manager to corral?
Well, he's a strong-minded man. Everyone knows that, and he's got his own views on those issues. So you had to be prepared to have robust discussions. I never had any hesitation in doing that. I think some people probably did in the past. But, there were times, particularly earlier in the campaign, where I think when he was preparing for press conferences, he'd spend far too much time getting into the detail, and sometimes the headline sort of issues were lost in the detail. But he understood that we needed to revise and review that, and he did do that in the course of the campaign.
Nicola Roxon describes him as a bastard. Do you like him?
I do. I think he's a very good man. I think he's, easily the smartest kid in the classroom when it comes to the Labor Party, has been for some time.
But as a Labor man, is it not difficult for you to hitch your wagon to someone who was so, and his people around him, so spectacularly disloyal, to the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard during the 2010 election?
Well, that was a terrible period. I've got no doubt about that. I think the first act of real disloyalty, of course, came before that to him by the people that removed him. And I talk in the book about that.
But looking at his behaviour and those around him, that behaviour, you can excuse that in some way?
No, I would struggle to excuse any acts of disloyalty like that because I do think at the end of the day, the main purpose is to get the government elected or the party elected, and we should all be pulling together on that.
What's he going to do? Has he put the leadership baton well and truly back inside his backpack, or do you think he still harbours the prospect of becoming a Labor leader sometime in the future?
I don't think he does. I actually haven't asked him that question directly, Michael, but my sense of it is that this was his final shot in the locker, and it would be wrong, I think, for him to think that you can come back and renew all this. I think we've got to put a line under it all and move on. And I think he does think that too.
And just finally, Bruce Hawker, are you a campaign manager for hire now? And if so, would Kevin Rudd give you a good reference? I
think he probably would. I think it was an exciting campaign. And as I said, he did some things in the first few weeks of that, in his assumption to the leadership, which most people wouldn't do in their lifetime. And I thought that was a very exciting time. And of course, at the end of the day, even though he didn't win the election, it wasn't a devastating loss. All the cabinet ministers were returned. They're there, and they're in a position to hold the government to account.
Good to talk to you this morning. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Virginia.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce.